If you work harder every year and fall further behind every year, you've probably read Marx. His theory of exploitation made you angry. His prescription, public ownership, gave you hope. But here's the question nobody asks. Why did that prescription, across 100 years and a dozen countries, reliably cure the symptom while amputating the patient? Exploitation didn't disappear. Changed employers. From capitalist to bureaucrat. From market to plan. The question isn't whether Marx was stupid. He wasn't. The question is, what did he fundamentally misidentify? Because his misidentification didn't just produce bad theory, it produced a predictable mechanism for concentrating power into the hands of the worst possible predator. My argument is this: Marx confused two radically different things. And in doing so, he handed a blueprint for total domination to anyone willing to use it. Mid-19th century England was not a good place to be poor. Children worked 16-hour shifts. Men died at machines. Capital accumulated upward with mechanical precision. Marx looked at this and asked the right question. Is this arrangement legitimate? His answer came in the form of surplus value, the gap between what a worker produces and what a worker earns. That gap, he argued, is the structure of exploitation. He went further. Law is not the embodiment of justice. It is the will of the ruling class, enforced. Property rights, human rights, the rhetoric of freedom, packaging for the protection of concentrated wealth. These observations still sting. They should. But there's a difference between a sting that reveals and a sting that blinds. Marx saw a real fragment of the world. The fatal move was treating that fragment as the complete diagnosis, and then writing a prescription accordingly. Marx believed value was created entirely in production. In his model, the factory worker is the source. The merchant, the brand, the platform, these are parasites dividing a cake they didn't bake. What he couldn't see was what the economist Ronald Coase would later formalize. Transaction costs are real costs, and eliminating them is real production. How do you know the product is safe? How do you know the price is fair? How do you know there's recourse if something goes wrong? A brand doesn't merely move goods, produces certainty. A market platform doesn't merely provide space, compresses search costs. The elimination of doubt and the reduction of risk are not secondary activities. They are, in a complex modern economy, among the most expensive forms of production that exist. Marx was trying to explain a dynamic, probabilistic, information-dense world using a linear, deterministic 19th century model of labor time. He saw a man turning iron into nails and called that production. He didn't see that making sure the nail buyer isn't defrauded is production of comparable or greater value. The gold standard made the contradictions of industrial capitalism worse than they needed to be. Gold supply is linear. Industrial output is exponential. The result is a structural deflationary squeeze. Too many goods chasing too little money. This is a monetary architecture problem, not a property structure problem. The monetary reforms that followed, the gradual abandonment of gold constraints, central banking, fractional reserve systems, were precisely the institutional evolution that could have addressed the crisis Marx was observing. But Marx couldn't see the monetary mechanism. He couldn't see the transaction cost variable. So he had nowhere to assign the crisis except to private property itself. His diagnosis was wrong. His prescription followed logically from a wrong diagnosis. That's not stupidity. That's the danger of a coherent theory built on an incomplete picture. Marx's prescription: abolish private property, install public ownership. He assumed that changing the label changes the predator. He was wrong about the most elementary thing in political theory. Institutions don't constrain human nature. Power consumes institutions. Under capitalism, the owner is constrained by the market. Make bad decisions, go bankrupt. Price too high, lose customers. Hire wrong, competitors take your share. The market is a brutal, impersonal disciplinary system. It doesn't care about your ideology. Punishes failure. Under public ownership, the administrator is constrained by nothing except the political hierarchy above them. Make bad decisions, get promoted for loyalty. Allocate resources politically, stay in power. Eliminate rivals, consolidate control. There is no bankruptcy mechanism. There is no customer exit. There is no external audit. Every historical instance of Marx's state building produced the same result. Not because the people involved were exceptionally corrupt, but because the structure selects for exactly that behavior. When theory collides with fact and the response is to force the facts to comply, you've already arrived at the endpoint. History wrote the answer in large letters. Power without the counterweight of private property becomes the only predator. Marx couldn't see transaction costs at the micro level, so he underestimated power costs at the macro level. He thought eliminating the complexity of markets would produce simple justice. What he actually eliminated was the last material leverage individuals had against concentrated force. Which raises the question, what exactly was that leverage? This is where Marx made his irreversible error. He conflated two things that are categorically different. This is not a legal concept. It is a physical fact. When you labor, bear risk, and apply intelligence to material reality, you form a direct relationship with that material. You planted the field. You built the shelter. You hold the bowl of food. That control doesn't require a certificate. It doesn't require a state to recognize it. Precedes law, precedes the state. The primitive man who picks fruit from the tree controls that fruit, not because tribal law says so, but because his hand is holding it. This is what John Locke was pointing at. Labor mixes the self with the world and creates a real prior-to-law claim. The philosophical grounding was always there. The physical reality is even more basic. Force applied to matter produces control. This is a constructed system. The state, through contracts, courts, police, and registries, codifies, amplifies, or removes the control described above. Your apartment is a legal property claim. Between you and the physical apartment sits a title document, a government database, a legal jurisdiction, and a bureaucratic apparatus that decides, every day, whether to continue honoring that claim. You never directly hold the apartment. You hold a relationship with an institution that holds it for you. This ownership is, structurally, always borrowed from the state. Marx wanted to attack the second system. He had legitimate grievances against how legal property rights were being used to entrench and amplify inequality. But his instrument was too blunt. In trying to cut legal property, he severed natural property as well. He thought that eliminating the micro-level physical connection between individuals and resources would eliminate exploitation. What he didn't account for, the management of resources always requires specific humans to exercise control. When you destroy distributed individual control, that control doesn't evaporate. It aggregates. It flows upward. It concentrates into a single superintermediary, the state, which now controls all productive resources and all conditions of survival. That entity becomes a more total, more unconstrained private owner than any capitalist in history. Because a capitalist can go bankrupt. The state cannot be fired. The solution was never public ownership. The solution is understanding individual power at the level it actually operates. Individual power is not a right granted by a system. It is force you develop and exercise. It doesn't wait for anyone's recognition. Like gravity, it acts on reality continuously, whether or not anyone names it. 3 layers. The body is power. The most fundamental unit, the capacity to intake energy, resist force, grow capability. What you can do physically is irreducible leverage. Intelligence is power. The ability to read patterns, use timing, understand systems, deploy information asymmetrically. This is force applied at leverage points rather than brute positions. Coalition is power. Organized groups amplify individual capacity exponentially. But coalition requires surrendering some individual control. The danger is never coalition itself. The danger is making that surrender total, irreversible, and unauditable. The moment you join a group you cannot exit and cannot monitor, you haven't gained collective power. You've become fuel for someone else's. What you're building when you strengthen these 3 is not rights. It's the substrate from which rights emerge as a byproduct. Justice at the macro level is downstream of distributed power at the micro level. It is not the starting point. It is the output. The moment you surrender your microcontrol over resources, any resources, in exchange for a macro promise, you have cut the wire connecting your individual power to the world. That is not liberation. That is the transition from citizen to subject. Closing. Marx's failure was not a failure of intelligence. It was the failure of a man who, having found a powerful diagnostic lens, mistook it for a complete map, and then offered a prescription that functioned as a delivery mechanism for the very domination he opposed. When you study any systematic theory of political control seriously, you feel the pull. The machinery of domination is comprehensible. It's almost elegant. And the question surfaces, if this mechanism works, why shouldn't I use it? That pull is exactly where you need something colder than ideology. Not another grand narrative. Not another utopian prescription. A framework built from the ground up. One that takes the machinery of power seriously, refuses to moralize it away, and gives you actual tools for navigating it without becoming its instrument. I call this framework objectivism. Not as a set of ideals to believe in, as a discipline for seeing clearly, a way of returning theory to material reality before theory gets someone killed. Next time, I'll show you what objectivism actually is, where it comes from, and why it was never built to inspire you. It was built to stop you from destroying yourself and others with the best of intentions.